In the beginning, the world was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. The lands stretched far and wide, full of forests, rivers, mountains, and cities that were empty yet alive with memories of what humans had once built. These cities were grand, with towering structures that seemed to touch the sky, intricate bridges connecting islands of stone, and streets paved so carefully that every step echoed through time. No human walked these streets, yet the world was not entirely empty. A group of creatures wise, silent, and cautious moved through this realm, caring for everything as if it were their own. They were not humans, but they had been chosen long ago to protect what humans had left behind. The oldest of them always reminded the younger ones that there was only one rule they must never break: do not wake the humans. Humans slept deeply, and their slumber was fragile. If disturbed, there could be consequences beyond imagination. Yet no one truly knew what those consequences might be. Among these guardians, there was one who stood out not because of strength or skill, but because of curiosity. Lyra was her name. Unlike the others, who followed the rule with unquestioning obedience, she often wandered where she should not. She would look at the cities and imagine the people who had once lived there, picturing them laughing, speaking, working, and celebrating. In her mind, humans were more than slumbering giants. They were fascinating beings whose history was filled with beauty and danger alike. She studied the machines, the tools, and even the smallest trinkets humans had left behind. To her, every object told a story, and she could spend hours trying to piece together what life had been like before the humans went to sleep. The elders, who had lived through centuries and seen the consequences of mistakes, warned her repeatedly. They told stories of past generations of guardians who had tried to get too close, who had wanted to experiment or interfere, and how the rule had been set for a reason that even they did not fully understand. Lyra listened, but her mind always wandered to the question: why were humans sleeping, and why was their awakening so dangerous? There was a hunger in her to see what would happen if she just peeked, if she just tried to understand them fully. Every day, she practiced small acts of care for the world around her. She watered the plants in the old gardens, swept the streets of debris, and made sure that animals had food. But she did all of this with her eyes occasionally wandering toward the chambers where the humans lay in sleep. These chambers were vast, almost temple-like, and filled with soft light that never seemed to come from the sun. The humans were arranged carefully, each in their own resting place, untouched by time, as though it held them in a perfect pause. Lyra felt a strange mix of awe and fear every time she approached them. They were so large, so powerful even in stillness, that it made her feel small. Yet the same fear drew her closer. She would often imagine the moment when the humans might wake naturally. Would they be kind? Would they remember their own history? Would they punish the world for the centuries that had passed? These thoughts both excited and terrified her. She asked questions to the elders, but they gave only vague answers, insisting that some things were not meant to be known. Their silence only fueled Lyra's curiosity further. She began to watch the humans carefully, noting every slight change in their breathing, every flicker of movement in their fingers, and every subtle expression on their faces. It was as if she could almost predict what they might do if they were ever disturbed. The world around her seemed peaceful, almost too perfect. Birds flew freely in the skies, their songs echoing over the abandoned cities. Rivers flowed steadily, sparkling as though reflecting the memory of life that had existed long ago. The guardians moved silently among these landscapes, ensuring that the cities remained intact, that the machines and tools did not fall into ruin, and that no harm came to the sleeping humans. Lyra often wondered how long this balance had existed and whether it would last forever. Every small mistake could be catastrophic, yet everything seemed stable for now. Despite the calm, there was a sense of tension in the air. The rule was simple: do not wake the humans. But the simplicity of the rule did not make it easier to follow. Every step she took near the chambers, every curiosity she acted on, felt like walking on a tightrope. She knew that even the smallest action could lead to a disaster she could not undo. Her dreams were filled with visions of humans awakening suddenly, towering over the world with anger or confusion, their power overwhelming everything. Yet in her waking hours, she could not resist imagining the humans smiling, thanking the guardians for their care, and sharing stories of their lives before slumber. Lyra's fascination was not just with humans themselves, but with the idea of the world they had left behind. She loved the machines that humans had built, some intricate and delicate, others massive and dangerous. She loved the architecture, the art, and the books left on dusty shelves. In her mind, every artifact was alive, containing fragments of the humans' thoughts, hopes, and dreams. She spent hours trying to understand their purpose, piecing together the logic behind inventions that even the elders no longer fully understood. To Lyra, this world was a puzzle, and the humans were the key pieces. Though she often questioned the rule, Lyra also respected it in her own way. She did not interfere directly with the humans' sleep, nor did she touch the chambers without purpose. Her curiosity stayed within limits, but those limits felt increasingly narrow as time went on. She could feel that the world was holding its breath, as if aware that something was about to happen, even though everything seemed peaceful. The guardians continued their work methodically, tending to the cities and the lands. always watching over the humans, always silent, always careful. Every day brought a mixture of awe, fear, and longing for Lyra. She loved the world she lived in, the stories hidden in every corner, and the fragile balance that had existed for centuries. Yet she felt a pull toward understanding the humans themselves, toward learning what might happen if she ever crossed the line. Deep down, she knew that the rule was there to protect, not just the humans but the entire world from a disaster that no one could fully predict. Still, the question lingered in her mind constantly, like a whisper. What would happen if the humans woke? Her life, her curiosity, and the centuries of careful guardianship all existed in this quiet, tense equilibrium. She lived each day with wonder, caring for the abandoned world, yet secretly longing to see the humans, to understand them, and to perhaps witness the moment they opened their eyes. It was a world of beauty, danger, and mystery, and Lyra felt both privileged and burdened to be a part of it. Every action, every glance toward the sleepers, was a step closer to an unknown future, one that could either bring incredible discovery or unimaginable disaster. In this way, the stage was set for everything that would come next. Lyra's curiosity, the perfection of the sleeping humans, the careful balance maintained by the Guardians, and the ancient rule that must never be broken, all of these existed together in a fragile, intricate web. The world was peaceful, but the calm was deceptive, and the smallest spark of curiosity could light a chain of events that might never be undone. Lyra's curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. She had spent years caring for the sleeping humans and the lands around them, yet the urge to know more about the humans' lives and their world became almost impossible to ignore. She could not stop thinking about the lives the humans had led, the stories they had written, and the inventions they had created. Every time she walked through the cities, she noticed small details she had never seen before: a crack in a bridge that might have once carried carriages, a book lying open on a dusty shelf, a painting fading on a wall. Each object told a story, and each story deepened her desire to understand the humans more completely. Lyra was careful, always watching, never touching where she shouldn't, yet her mind raced with possibilities. She imagined conversations with humans, sharing thoughts and knowledge, asking them about their work, their families, and the adventures they had gone on. She wondered what they would think of the world now, a world that had evolved in their absence but still bore the marks of their civilization. Every thought made her heart beat faster, and every step closer to the humans' chambers filled her with both excitement and fear. The elders, wise and experienced, had grown increasingly concerned about her fascination. They had seen the way her eyes lingered on the sleepers, the way she moved silently but with an intensity that suggested she was always planning something. They warned her repeatedly, telling stories of other guardians who had dared to cross the invisible line and suffered terrible consequences. Some had disappeared entirely, swallowed by the chaos that followed when the humans were disturbed. Others had tried to communicate with the humans and returned forever changed, haunted by visions of anger and power that no guardian could control. Lyra listened, but their warnings felt distant. She understood the danger in theory, but her curiosity made it hard to fully accept the limits they imposed. Lyra began to spend more time near the chambers, observing the humans closely without interfering. She noticed how subtle movements sometimes passed across their faces, slight twitches of hands, flickers of eyelids, or a faint shift in breathing. She began to record these observations carefully, noting patterns and trying to interpret their meaning. Was it a dream? Was it a reflection of some internal thought or feeling? She could not be sure, but she felt that each small sign hinted at the incredible complexity of the human mind and body. The more Lyra observed, the more she felt a mixture of awe and fear. Humans were massive and powerful, even in sleep. Their presence filled the chambers as though they were living beings with a force of their own, yet they were silent and still. Lyra could almost hear their heartbeat echoing in her ears when she sat nearby, and she often found herself holding her breath, afraid of doing something that might awaken them accidentally. Despite this fear, she could not stop imagining what it would be like to see them wake naturally, to see them move, speak, and act in the world again. Her imagination grew bolder over time. She pictured humans walking through the cities she tended, marveling at the care that had preserved their creations. She imagined conversations where humans asked questions about the Guardians, about what had been done in their absence, and about the world that had continued without them. Lyra pictured their surprise, their joy, and even their anger, wondering how each reaction would unfold. The thought of interacting with humans directly was thrilling, almost irresistible, and she began to struggle with the tension between obedience and desire. Lyra's fascination was not limited to the humans themselves but extended to their creations. She studied machines, gadgets, and devices left behind, some intricate and delicate, others massive and imposing. She would spend hours trying to understand how they worked, imagining how humans had built them, and what purpose they had served. Sometimes, she tinkered carefully, making tiny adjustments or cleaning parts, always afraid that the smallest mistake could cause a problem. The elders had warned that even minor interference could have serious consequences. Yet she could not resist exploring the wonders humans had left behind. Animals and nature seemed to notice her restlessness as well. Birds would watch her from treetops. Squirrels would pause mid-scurry to glance at her. And the wind itself seemed to carry whispers of warning. The forests and rivers around the cities were alive, and Lyra felt their attention. She realized that the world itself was a delicate system, connected in ways that humans and guardians alike could not fully understand. Every time she acted, even with the best intentions, she risked altering the balance she had been taught to protect. Despite her growing curiosity, Lyra tried to maintain discipline. She followed her daily routines of cleaning, repairing, and tending to the land carefully. She made sure animals had food, repaired broken structures, and watered plants in gardens long abandoned. Yet her mind was never fully present in these tasks. It wandered constantly to the chambers, to the humans, to the question of what might happen if she pushed just a little further. Her attention to detail in her work became a kind of ritual, a way to justify her presence near the sleepers while secretly feeding her obsession. The elders continued to watch her closely, sometimes following her at a distance, sometimes quietly observing from hidden places. They debated among themselves what to do. Some believed she could be trained to respect the rule fully. Others feared she was too reckless, that her curiosity would one day lead to disaster. They spoke in hushed tones about the history of mistakes, of guardians who had thought they could understand the humans and failed, leaving chaos in their wake. Lyra overheard fragments of these conversations but chose not to confront them. Instead, she felt a mixture of guilt and defiance, aware of the danger but unwilling to suppress her drive to know. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the light turned gold across the empty cities, Lyra sat quietly near the chambers. She felt a tension in the air, a sense that something was stirring in the world. She could not explain it, but it was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Shadows stretched long across streets and buildings, and the sounds of the wind through the trees seemed sharper than usual. Lyra's pulse quickened, and she felt a thrill she could not resist. It was the perfect moment to observe, to watch closely, to see if the humans would react to the world around them, even in their sleep, night after night. She returned to the chambers, each visit more daring than the last. She observed, she noted, she imagined. Every small twitch of the humans, every subtle shift, fascinated her. She began to feel as though she understood them in a way that no other guardian could. She imagined their lives, their triumphs and failures, their joys and sorrows. She pictured the world through their eyes, imagining how they might respond to the changes that had occurred during their long slumber. The tension in Lyra grew. Her desire to see the humans awake, to witness their reaction firsthand, became almost unbearable. She knew that the rule existed for a reason, but she also felt a deep sense of inevitability. The curiosity that had driven her for years now felt like a force she could no longer control. It pulled her closer and closer to the forbidden, whispering that one day she might see the humans open their eyes. And in that quiet, tense world, Lyra stood on the edge of discovery, unaware that her fascination was slowly setting in motion events that could change everything. If you want, I can continue with part 3 explained in 1,000 words in TE same style, keeping it simple, interesting, and immersive. Lyra had always known there was a danger in getting too close to the sleeping humans, yet the pull of her curiosity had grown stronger than her fear. Night after night, she crept through the quiet cities, passing broken bridges and abandoned plazas, moving closer to the chambers where the humans lay. The light from the moon filtered through cracks in the ceilings, casting silver streaks across the smooth floors. And Lyra felt an irresistible urge to witness the humans more clearly. Every breath, every heartbeat seemed louder in the stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath along with her. She reminded herself to be careful, to respect the rule, but the desire to know, to see, and perhaps touch the humans just a little, burned brighter than any caution. One evening, while inspecting one of the chambers, Lyra noticed a subtle change. A single human's hand twitched, just barely, as if stirred by a dream. Her heart raced. She leaned closer, careful not to touch, straining her eyes to see any further movement. She felt a strange thrill, a mixture of fear and excitement, as if she were peering into a secret no one else could witness. She whispered softly to herself, telling herself to stop, to step back, but her feet remained frozen. Curiosity had seized her completely. For a long moment, she simply watched, tracing the lines of the human's face, imagining the life that had once filled it, the power it might possess even in sleep. Lyra's mind swirled with questions she had no answers to. What if waking this human could be controlled, even just a little? What if she could understand the humans fully by seeing them conscious again? Each question pushed her closer to the line she had been warned never to cross. The chambers, quiet for centuries, suddenly felt charged with an energy that made the hair on her arm stand on end. She felt as though the sleeping humans were aware of her presence in a way that no one had ever experienced before. As the days passed, her visits grew bolder. She would sit for hours, sometimes moving closer than she should, tracing the contours of the humans' faces, studying the curves of their fingers, the rise and fall of their chests. The smallest shifts that might have gone unnoticed before now seemed monumental. Every breath, every subtle movement, felt like a secret message, a hint at what might happen if the humans were ever disturbed. Lyra knew she was treading dangerous ground, yet the temptation was overwhelming. She began to imagine the humans waking, slowly at first, blinking and disoriented, then gradually realizing the centuries that had passed and the changes in the world. One night, her daring curiosity overcame all restraint. She wanted more than just observation. She wanted to see a reaction, to witness life stirring within the humans. Carefully, almost reverently, she reached out, letting her fingers hover just above the surface of a human's hand. She told herself she would not touch, that she would not break the rule. Yet as she leaned closer, the human's hand twitched again, and her finger brushed the skin ever so slightly. At that instant, a spark of energy surged through the chamber. Subtle at first, then growing stronger, as though a chain reaction had been triggered. The world seemed to hold its breath, the shadows stretching and trembling, the air thick with tension. The human's eyes opened suddenly, wide and startlingly aware. Lyra gasped and stumbled backward, frozen in shock. The human rose with a force that shook the floor beneath them, a presence so overwhelming that Lyra felt as though the chamber itself might collapse. The once quiet world erupted with sound, the creaking of ancient machinery, the groaning of structures that had lain still for centuries, and the sudden rush of air as the human drew a deep, powerful breath. Lyra realized instantly that the smallest touch, the tiniest spark of curiosity, had shattered the fragile balance that had existed for generations. Chaos followed immediately. The awakened human's movements set off a series of events that Lyra could not have imagined. Machines, long dormant, whirred to life unpredictably. Traps, locks, and defensive devices that had been carefully maintained by the Guardians for centuries malfunctioned. Fires ignited in forgotten corners, sending smoke curling through abandoned streets. Other humans, sensing the awakening of one of their own, began to stir, their massive forms shifting and rising, their groans echoing across the empty cities. Lyra's heart pounded as she realized the full scope of what she had done. The humans were not gentle in their return to consciousness. They were confused, angry, and powerful, a force that could not be controlled. The Elder's warnings came rushing back to her in vivid detail. Every story they had told, every caution they had given, now made terrifying sense. She had acted without thinking of the consequences, and the results were immediate and irreversible. The human's awakening was not a gentle process, it was a violent surge of energy, shaking the very foundations of the empire they had left behind. Buildings crumbled under the sudden movement of enormous bodies, and fires spread quickly through streets lined with centuries-old structures. Lyra tried to intervene, to calm the chaos, but she realized she was powerless. She had broken the one rule, and now the world was paying the price. Amid the destruction, Lyra felt a wave of guilt unlike anything she had experienced before. She had always thought of herself as careful, thoughtful, and respectful of the balance she was entrusted to maintain. Yet her curiosity, her desire to understand, had led to disaster. She watched as humans roamed through the cities, their movements reckless, their voices loud, and their eyes filled with confusion and rage. They were not monsters, but they were far beyond her ability to control. The Guardians, who had long relied on careful observation and subtle guidance, now faced a force that could not be reasoned with. Lyra's fear was compounded by the realization that the humans had power unlike anything she had imagined. The cities, carefully maintained for centuries, could not withstand the sudden surge of life and energy. Bridges collapsed, towers toppled, and fires consumed areas that had been stable for generations. The Guardians scrambled to protect what they could, but even their combined efforts seemed insufficient. Lyra felt a cold, sinking realization that this was not a minor mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a catastrophe of unimaginable scale, caused entirely by her hand. Even as chaos unfolded, Lyra could not stop thinking about the humans themselves. They were alive now, moving with purpose, and yet completely unaware of the centuries of care and caution that had surrounded them. She saw glimpses of their confusion, their attempts to understand what had happened, and the anger that flared in their eyes. It was terrifying, yet strangely compelling, as if the raw, unbridled power of life itself had been released after centuries of stillness. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, knowing that the world she had once cared for with such devotion might never recover fully. As the night wore on, the consequences of her actions became painfully clear. The humans were awake, the cities were falling, and the Guardians were struggling to respond. Lyra understood, in that moment, that curiosity could be dangerous, and that knowledge without caution could destroy even the most carefully maintained balance. She felt the full weight of the rule she had broken, the consequences of the one command that had been set for centuries, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The world had never felt so alive, yet so broken, as it did in the days after the humans awoke. Lyra stood at the edge of one of the largest cities, watching in stunned silence as chaos spread like wildfire. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled under the sudden movements of awakened humans. Streets that had been meticulously cared for by the Guardians for generations were torn apart by immense feet and restless energy. Fires erupted in corners of the city where dormant machines overheated or toppled, sparks igniting centuries of dust and dry wood. Smoke and ash filled the sky, turning the once bright world into a dull gray haze. Lyra's heart pounded as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. Her curiosity had triggered the collapse of an entire civilization. The humans, confused and disoriented, did not immediately understand the changes around them. They looked at the world they had left behind with eyes wide open, seeing centuries of decay and alteration. They roamed through streets and buildings, their steps heavy and uncertain, knocking over remnants of machines and furniture. They shouted to one another, their voices echoing through the empty plazas and crumbling towers. Their anger was not directed at Lyra personally, but at the world itself for being different from what they remembered. Every step they took seemed to shake the ground, every movement carrying the weight of centuries of sleep and power that had been dormant. Lyra tried desperately to intervene, moving among the humans with the hope of guiding them gently, but she quickly realized her efforts were almost useless. The humans were far stronger and more unpredictable than anything she had imagined. Any attempt to redirect them only seemed to confuse or provoke them further. She could see the destruction she had indirectly caused. The towers leaning dangerously, bridges falling, and fires spreading through markets and homes. Guardians, who had long lived in careful order, were scrambling, attempting to protect the few structures that might survive. Even their combined knowledge and strength seemed insufficient against the sudden awakening of such powerful beings as she moved through the chaos. Lyra noticed smaller details that terrified her even more. The humans' interactions with their own inventions triggered unexpected consequences. Ancient machines, left dormant for centuries, whirred to life in unpredictable ways. Some collapsed under their weight, crushing parts of the city. Others spewed fire, smoke, or strange noises, startling the humans further and making them move more erratically. Lyra realized that the humans' awakening had not just disrupted the physical world but also the systems that maintained balance and order. Every careful design, every rule the Guardians had followed, now seemed fragile, as if it could collapse at any moment. Despite the overwhelming fear, Lyra could not look away. She watched as the humans attempted to make sense of the destruction. Some tried to restore order, lifting fallen beams or extinguishing small fires. Others simply shouted or ran, unable to control the sudden rush of energy and power. Lyra felt a mixture of awe and terror. These beings, who had once been asleep and harmless, were now forces of nature, capable of both rebuilding and destroying. The realization that she had caused this shift made her stomach twist with guilt. She had wanted to understand, to see, to know, and now the consequences were far beyond anything she had imagined. The fires spread quickly, consuming entire sections of the cities. Smoke and ash drifted through streets and alleys, coating buildings and monuments in gray. Guardians worked frantically to control the flames, using water from rivers and lakes, but the sheer speed and unpredictability of the fire made containment nearly impossible. Lyra moved through the streets, helping where she could, but every effort seemed small against the overwhelming chaos. The humans, unaware of her intentions, sometimes collided with her or knocked over objects she tried to save. She felt powerless, overwhelmed, and responsible for every crack in the walls and every toppled tower. Even the natural world seemed affected by the awakening. Animals that had once lived quietly in forests and rivers fled in panic, sensing the tremors and energy released by the humans' movements. Birds scattered into the skies in frantic flocks, and rivers churned where large machines had collapsed, sending waves of debris downstream. The land itself seemed to groan under the sudden disruption, as if responding to the disturbance in the balance that had been carefully maintained for centuries. Lyra realized that the humans' awakening had consequences far beyond the cities. It was not just the empire that was at risk, but the entire world that had existed in quiet harmony amid the destruction. Lyra also saw human emotions laid bare. Confusion, fear, and anger mixed together in ways that were almost tangible. Some humans looked around bewildered, unsure of what had happened, while others tried to assert control over their surroundings, lifting fallen objects or shouting commands that echoed through empty streets. Lyra watched a group of humans attempting to climb a toppled tower, their faces grim with determination, and realized that their power and resilience were frightening and awe-inspiring at the same time. Even though she had caused this awakening, she could not deny the humans' incredible strength and intelligence. The Guardians were stretched to their limits, working tirelessly to prevent further damage. Some tried to repair structures as quickly as they could, while others attempted to guide humans away from the most dangerous areas. Lyra joined them, her hands moving quickly, her mind racing with plans to minimize further destruction. Yet the humans were unpredictable. One moment they would cooperate, and the next, a sudden movement would undo all the work that had been done. Lyra felt despair creeping in, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on her shoulders. Every decision she made seemed to matter more than ever, yet no choice could fully reverse the damage in the midst of the chaos. Lyra noticed the subtle shifts in human behavior. Moments of curiosity, of play, or of wonder appeared even in the middle of destruction. A human paused to examine a broken machine. Another reached out to touch a plant that had survived the fires. Lyra realized that despite the anger and confusion, the humans still retained their humanity, the desire to understand, to create, to interact with the world. It was both a comfort and a challenge, as she knew that their curiosity, like hers, could lead to even greater consequences if left unchecked. As days passed, the fires began to burn out, and the initial chaos subsided, leaving behind ruins and ash. The cities were scarred, the streets cracked and broken, and many buildings reduced to rubble. Guardians continued their work tirelessly, salvaging what they could, repairing structures where possible, and trying to restore some sense of order. Lyra moved through the remains, her heart heavy with guilt and regret. She had wanted to see the humans, to understand them, to satisfy her curiosity, and instead she had unleashed destruction on a scale she had never imagined. Despite the devastation, there was also a strange sense of new possibility. Humans had survived the initial chaos, and some were beginning to explore the world with cautious curiosity. Lyra noticed small acts of rebuilding, attempts to restore structures, and tentative cooperation among the humans themselves. It was clear that their awakening had not only caused destruction but had also ignited the potential for a new beginning. Lyra realized that the balance she had known was gone forever, replaced by a world shaped by human power, Guardians' care, and the lingering consequences of her actions. Lyra understood, painfully, that the one rule she had broken was sacred for a reason. Her curiosity, once a source of wonder and knowledge, had brought devastation to the Empire. The humans' awakening had set events into motion that could not be reversed, and the world she had known would never return to its previous peace. She felt a deep responsibility, not only for the destruction but also for guiding what remained of the world toward recovery. Every choice she made now carried the weight of centuries, and she knew that the lesson of this catastrophe would shape the future for generations of both humans and Guardians alike. The sun dipped behind the broken city as if it, too, was tired of watching ruins. The ash-filled wind curled around Koro while he stood on the roof of the collapsed library, looking down at the silent streets that once held millions of humans. He had been here many times in the last months, hoping every day that something would change, that a sign or a clue or even a small sign of hope would appear. But the world below stayed quiet, the same emptiness stretching from one end of the horizon to the other. It bothered him in a way he could not explain. He wanted answers, but the world only offered silence. He stepped away from the edge, his paws brushing against old shards of glass. He remembered how the humans used to walk these paths, laughing, arguing, working, living. He used to hide from them, carefully following the one rule he had been taught since birth: never wake the humans. They were unpredictable, loud, and easily angered, but they were also creators, builders, the makers of order. Their presence had kept everything moving in a way that felt almost magical. Now that magic was gone, only their buildings and machines remained, frozen without the hands that used to guide them. As he climbed down the side of the building, gripping exposed metal beams, he kept replaying the last days of the humans in his mind. They had been fighting something unseen. Rumors among the remaining animals spoke of a sickness spreading through their bodies, a sickness that no machine or leader could stop. Others whispered that humans themselves had destroyed their empire through their own inventions. Whatever the reason, the truth was simple: their entire world had collapsed in a matter of weeks, leaving everything they built to crumble slowly under layers of dust. Koro walked along the cracked roads, stepping around shattered cars and bent lampposts. The quiet made every movement sound louder than it should. A plastic bag rolled past his feet, pushed only by the weak wind. He followed the path until he reached what used to be a market square. The stalls were still standing, though covered with gray. Fruits had long rotted away, leaving only stains on the counters. Posters hung loosely from boards, their edges eaten by time. He placed a paw on one, brushing away dust to reveal a child's drawing of a human family. He stared at it a long time, even though he tried not to think about it. A strange feeling settled in his chest. He moved on, passing by a large statue at the center of the square. It showed a human leader standing tall, pointing forward, as if giving orders. Even now, at the base of the statue, someone had once placed flowers, now dried and brittle. Koro wondered what it must have been like to be a human, to lead millions, to have so much power and then lose it all. He did not hate them, not like some of the others did. They had made mistakes, but they had also built wonders. They had protected the smaller beings when they could. They had kept order, and without them, the world felt like a puzzle missing too many pieces. He sat under the statue, his body heavy with thought. The world felt too big now, too open. Humans had kept everything organized. They fixed the roads, managed the electricity, controlled the machines, kept the balance. With them gone, animals were left wandering among metal giants they did not understand. Some had embraced the freedom, exploring human homes and eating whatever was left behind. Others lived in fear, unsure how to survive without the ones who used to feed them. Many simply accepted the new reality and moved toward the countryside. But Koro could not. Something inside him refused to leave. He rose again once the cold ground began to numb his legs. The next place he visited was the school. The doors hung open, creaking softly in the wind. Inside, everything was in chaos: chairs overturned, papers scattered, shelves broken. He walked through the hallway, imagining the sounds that once filled it: children laughing, teachers calling out lessons, footsteps rushing between rooms. He stopped at a classroom and entered quietly. On one desk he found a notebook left open, as if the student had planned to return the next day. The handwriting was shaky in some lines, neat in others. Lessons about history and science filled the pages. Drawings of animals, including one that looked strangely like him, decorated the corners. He sat back on his hind legs and stared at the drawing for a long time. Maybe the humans had liked them more than he realized. Maybe the rule about not waking them wasn't because humans hated them, but because the old ones wanted to protect them. As he flipped through more pages, he found a line written in bright red ink. One day, we will explore the stars. He thought about that dream. The stars still shone at night, but there were no humans left to reach them. The world felt smaller without their ambition. He left the school and continued walking, letting his thoughts drift. He wondered where all the humans went in their final days. Some buildings showed signs of struggle, as if people had tried to escape something. Windows were broken, doors pushed open from inside, belongings thrown around in panic. But there were no bodies, no signs of what happened to them. That mystery was what kept him awake at night. It was why he continued searching, exploring new parts of the city every week. Something deep inside him insisted that the truth was still out there, waiting to be found. As the sky darkened, he reached the outskirts of the city. From here, the land stretched into long fields and abandoned farms. Beyond the farms, a dark forest rose like a wall of shadows. Animals lived there, forming new groups and territories. Some had invited him to join them, but he always refused. The city still felt like his responsibility, as if he owed something to the humans. Maybe he wanted to protect what they left behind. Maybe he wasn't ready to abandon the world they built. Or maybe he was afraid that if he left, the last traces of them would disappear forever. He stopped at the edge of a broken highway, staring at the long stretch of cracked concrete. Streetlights had fallen in some places, lying across lanes like giant bones. Cars were frozen mid-journey, their doors locked, their drivers vanished. He climbed onto the roof of one car and looked around. The silence pressed against him from all sides, making his heart beat louder. He took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. It tasted like ash and metal, like memories that refused to fade. He walked along the highway until he reached a bridge overlooking a dry river. The water had slowly vanished after the machines stopped pumping it. Below the bridge, he noticed a small movement. He crouched, narrowing his eyes. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at him from the shadows. A fox stepped out, its fur thin and ragged. It looked at him with curiosity but not fear. They stood quietly, studying each other. After a moment, the fox turned and ran into the darkness. He watched it disappear, then continued across the bridge. Something about the encounter made him feel lonelier than before. He missed the presence of others. He missed the world when it was full of life. As he walked, he found himself thinking about the humans' rule again. He used to believe it was strict and unfair. Now he understood why the elders had feared waking them. Humans were powerful, but they were also fragile. They could build empires but could not protect themselves from everything. Even their greatest strength could not save them in the end. He walked deeper into the ruined neighborhoods. Houses stood open like hollow boxes, their walls cracked, their roofs sagging. He stepped into one house cautiously. Inside, dust covered everything: the televisions, the couches, the photographs on the wall. He looked at the pictures carefully. A human family smiled back at him. 2 adults, 2 children. They looked happy, peaceful. He traced the edge of one photo with his paw, imagining what happened to them. Did they run? Did they hide? Did they survive somewhere else? Or did they vanish like the rest? He searched through the house, finding little things that humans once treasured: a bracelet, a half-finished puzzle, a music player with no power left. Each object felt like a whisper from the past. He sat on the couch, letting the old springs creak under his weight. The silence of the home wrapped around him like a cold blanket. He closed his eyes and pictured the family living here. He imagined the smells of food, the sound of laughter, the arguments, the celebrations. All of it was gone now, leaving only ghosts of memory. He moved to the kitchen and found a refrigerator still standing. When he opened it, a rotten smell escaped, making him step back. He shut it quickly and looked around the room. Dirty dishes still sat on the table, as if the family planned to wash them after dinner. He wondered if they had been forced to leave suddenly. The thought troubled him. Whatever happened to the humans, it had taken them fast. He left the house and wandered into the yard. A swing hung from a tree branch, moving slightly in the wind. He pushed it gently, watching it sway. The yard felt sad in a quiet way. The plants were overgrown, reaching toward the house as if trying to reclaim it. A broken toy truck lay near the fence. He picked it up in his mouth, then set it down again. He knew it didn't belong to him, but he felt connected to it somehow.